host?
Okay, here we are. We're recording now because we're at 6 o'clock. And I'm going to go ahead and admit everyone. Okay? Everyone's coming in. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Everybody in?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. It looks like everybody's in. You can unmute yourself as long as you don't have background noise. But if there is background noise, you might want to keep yourself muted until you have a chance to speak. Okay?
Can you hear my washing machine, Adrian?
No, I can't, James.
Good. I'm doing laundry.
We would like your video if possible, rather than just some pretty picture on the screen.
I turned mine on.
Okay, we've got more people coming in. So far, we've got 23 participants. I recognize a lot of you. Love that. Put on your video, guys. We want to see you if you can. Okay, let's see how we're doing. We're doing good. One more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start because we're now 1 minute past the hour. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the Weiss Paris Writers Workshop discussion panel for cross-culture or cultural appropriation. That's our topic today. And we have some amazing panelists with us. We have Alicia McKenzie, Ian Thomas Shaw, and Caroline View. And if you open your chat box, okay, the chat box is at the bottom. There's a little icon there, click on it. You will see a link to a PDF document which tells you all about these three amazing people. So I urge you to do that before we get started.
Sorry, I don't see anything.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, yeah, file.
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
You don't see it either?
No.
I don't.
Drive,
Is it file?
Google Drive.
There's a file. There's
Oh, it's a file. Okay, it's on the right side.
I'm gonna put another one in here just to make sure.
No, that's fine. I thought it was a link. There we go.
There it is.
There's a link. There's a Dropbox link as well as a file. Okay.
Look at it now.
Sure. Anytime. Well, you can look at it anytime you want. Okay, but it's there for you. And I just want to make sure that everyone pretty much understands what we mean by cultural appropriation. So I'm going to give you just a very brief definition. Cultural appropriation, also called cultural misappropriation, occurs when a person from one culture adopts the fashion, iconography, trends, or styles from another culture. Some of the most controversial and harmful examples of cultural appropriation happen when the culture being appropriated is one of a historically oppressed group. So everybody pretty much understands what that means? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up with, we have three different questions. These three questions have been provided by the panelists. They will each answer, okay, each of the questions, and then we can have a brief discussion about them. And we're going to try to time them so they're about 15 minutes each so that we can actually manage all three questions, because this is the kind of topic that we could talk about for hours, but we have 1 hour. So we're going to start now. Okay? Okay, question one, and there's a little intro to it. There is a thin line between appreciation and appropriation. Debates rage about what differentiates cultural appropriation from cross-cultural appreciation. Some say appropriation doesn't exist because no culture is completely original and uninfluenced. Others believe musicians and designers get a pass because they are creating art that is open to discussion and interpretation. And we have to add writers to that list. So the question is, when do you cross the line? And of the three panelists, Ian, Alicia, Caroline, any one of you want to answer that one?
Shall I start?
Somebody start. Alicia, start.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd just like to say thanks to WISE and to the Paris Writers Workshop for putting all this together. And thanks to everyone for joining us. So, this is a tricky and complicated issue. When do you cross the line? I think that you cross the line when you show a lack of respect for the art, the music, the fashion of a certain culture. Also, when you think that this is yours for the taking. Now, it's a thin line between appreciation and appropriation, but I think most people can recognize the difference. And as writers, we have to have an awareness, and I think we have to have a certain responsibility about how we approach these issues. Over to you, Adrian.
Okay, so let's hear from Ian.
Yeah, I would agree with what Alicia said. I would add that normally in writing, it's rare that you write just about one culture, unless you're writing monocultural type of writing. It's biographical and you're only staying in your own culture. So you'll be making references to people from other cultures, other ethnicities. And the key word that Alicia was talking about was respect. So if you want to talk and have characters in your novels that are coming from different cultures, you should research and you should understand those cultures before you put it to paper. And part of that is speaking to people from those cultures if you have doubts, because the harm really comes when you misrepresent a culture and you reinforce perhaps negative stereotypes about people coming from certain cultures because you haven't taken the time to really understand the cultures of some of your characters. Often they may be just secondary characters in your writing and not the principal characters.
Okay, Caroline.
Yes, I agree with Ian and with Alicia. You do have to do research before you write. But at the same time, I find doing research is not enough. Like internet research, reading a few books, interviewing a couple of people, maybe that's not enough. Because to actually really know the mentality of the people and what they think, you really have, first of all, if you can, speak the language. If you can, know the music they're listening to, know the comic strip that they read when they were a kid. You can't do the kind of thing. It's very hard to really get into, really represent your character as a truly multi-dimensional person. That's just why it's important. It's not important, but it's helpful maybe to have a sensitivity reader who can help you. We'll get to that later.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Of the group there, any of you have questions or comments you'd like to make about this? Renee.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Well, I am writing a novel, and it is a story of interracial love derailed by family secrets of ethnicity. And I had an interesting experience. I had a publisher who was also Black review and critique the first 10 pages of my novel. And during some dialogue between the white male protagonist and Black female protagonist, she refers to herself and her people as Black Americans, or just Black. And it was interesting that a younger, I'm in my 60s, a younger Black publisher, who I would say was in her late 30s or 40s, throughout my first 10 pages, maybe I referred to Black 2 or 3 times. She changed that to African American. So sometimes it is a generational thing and not just a cultural thing. And we talked about it and I said, this is interesting because when she gave me a written critique and then we talked over Zoom. And she said, oh yeah, and you have to change this. And I said, but I've never referred to myself as African American. I said, I think it's generational. I mean, I grew up, the Negro, colored, African American, Black, all of those have been okay within the race. And so that's another little factor that plays into this whole issue of, like Caroline said, of doing your research. Fortunately, my story takes place mostly in the late 1990s, and the protagonists are in their late 30s, which was about the same time I was in my 30s, 40s. So I'm very comfortable that my characters are using terms that I would have used back then. But the young publisher's point really made me think, okay, if these were contemporary characters, I'd have to be careful about how they talk to each other about race as Blacks, Blacks talking to Blacks or Blacks talking to white, even as I do.
That's a really interesting point. And okay, so, and Dee Burton.
Yes, I just wanted to say I appreciate the remarks you just made, because what you're talking about is being inside the character. And the word I haven't heard us use yet is empathy. And it seems to me that that's what makes all the difference. Not so much external kinds of research like learning about, but more being able to empathize with the person, being able to be inside the person's head. And sometimes, of course, you know, if you're writing about your own experiences and those of people you know well, that comes naturally. But I think you have to be able to find some way that you know the characters, not from just reading about them, but from being able to empathize. I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, but that's, you know, the thing that seems so important to me.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else have a comment, or any of the panelists can certainly chime back in too.
Yeah, I think I have a comment. I think we have to be careful when we empathize with characters from other, you know, ethnicities or cultures. Sometimes we do it with good intention, but if you haven't actually lived the experience and you haven't, you know, lived what it means to be an African American or Indigenous person in Canada, you can think you have it right. You might be quite close, but it may not be as authentic as it needs to be. And if you're writing in the first person point of view and not in the third person point of view, it sort of gets you into that area of cultural appropriation, which may make some people feel uncomfortable that as a non-African American writer, as a non-Indigenous writer, that you're assuming the persona. And you think you're doing a good job, but it can come over quite wrong for other people. And I think that's a problem for many people.
If I may add to that, I think a key concern too is who has access. And, you know, we're not all equal as far as access is concerned. And we spoke about this earlier, just the controversy around American Dirt, when Latino writers became very upset that this book gained such traction and was hailed as the book about the Mexican refugee experience. And the writer received, I think, a huge advance, the kind of advance that Latino writers can only dream of. So there's this issue of access as well. If somebody, so I grew up in Jamaica, and there have been so many books written about Bob Marley by people outside of the Caribbean. and they are immediately hailed as experts. If I decide to write a book about Bob Dylan, I'm not sure I would be given the same access or acclaim. Do you see? So there's that distinction as well. The whole issue of mainstream versus voices that are not considered important enough. And this is something I think as a writer, you have to be aware of, especially if you are from a dominant group.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just want to add something. I read a very interesting article recently about how much money intern in big publishing company makes. A lot of those big publishing company are based in New York, you know, and they're giving $30,000 a year, those interns. And in New York, you cannot live on $30,000 a year. You need a minimum $40,000 a year. So how do these interns survive? And so they do more research and they realize a lot of those kids are actually there because the parents are helping them. You know, they have rich parents. They come out of Yale, they come out of Harvard, and they are the gatekeeper. You know, they are the first people who read those manuscripts. So most of them are, you know, because they come out of Yale, they come out of Harvard, then they are rich. Most of them are white. So they are the gatekeeper, and they are the one who decide if the book go up or not. You know, so if something they can understand, you know, like something like a Mexican story, but written by a white in a way that they can understand and identify with, it goes up. Something written by a Mexican woman that they cannot understand with, it might not go up. So.
Wow.
And I think it's something we have to think about also.
That's a very interesting point. Anyone else have any comments or questions on this? Something they're doing themselves they'd like to share with us?
I have a question or a comment.
Okay.
I'm in Toronto, and I mean, maybe this will come up in the later questions, but just in terms of, I wanted to throw out the idea of you know, dominant cultures, predominantly like white European people of European descent, white people essentially disempowering themselves and allowing space, giving space to other authors to tell their stories, right? And I come up with, yeah, I just wanted to throw that idea out there and see what people thought. I know like there's a very small space in the writing world to begin with, so just wanted to throw that out as a possible topic of discussion.
Go ahead, Vina.
I just wanted to point to, I think I consider a very important issue, which maybe doesn't come up as much, and it's the issue of inspiration. I don't know how, although I guess we're all writers, I am. I don't know how everyone else comes with it, but you know, you're suddenly caught up by this character, by this idea, you know, as fiction writers, it comes out of left field. I don't always write about my culture. I have written about my culture. I'm Indo-Canadian, but I set my second novel in an African country. I made it imaginary, so also to, you know, not have to deal with all of these kind of things. But my protagonist was Indo-Canadian, so I felt I was on firm ground. But there were three other important women characters who are all African, quote unquote, from Africa in this imaginary country. And there was one was a subsistence farmer. I've met very fleetingly some subsistence farmers in India, never anyone in Africa. However, I just was so inspired by this woman losing her land, subsistence farmer, some issue I've followed over the years. So I wrote this novel, and actually a lot of Black women of African descent, well, 3 or 4 picked it up right away from Net Galley, I think that place called, where, you know, people ask for reviews. And they sort of, I didn't know what to expect, but they were like, oh, they had some little critiques, but they were not about characterization or appropriation. So I was like, frankly, let out a sigh of relief. And I also felt I hadn't gone that route. And the novel had obviously been looked at by publisher and, you know, some other people who had looked at it and hadn't said anything. But again, to come back to this issue of inspiration, what if I'm inspired by, you know, something outside my culture, which is happening more and more? Like my first 2 books were more related to my own tangentially or indirectly my experience, and I'm not so into it anymore. I'm writing about other cultures, and well, I'm a woman of color, so does that mean I can access and write about a white person, for example, and sort of get away with it more? Like, I don't know, there's a lot of politics involved, so as we know, and it should be too, because power is an important issue to look at. So I'm throwing out the idea of inspiration basically in the mix.
Okay, thank you, Veena. I'm going to move on to question 2 because of timing, but it's all pretty much based on the same topic. And the question that I'm posing now are, what are the benefits of writing across cultures for readers and literature in general? And what is the potential harm of cultural appropriation? So I leave it to the panelists first, and then we'll open it up. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I think there's a lot of benefits about writing across cultures. If we only wrote about our own culture, we would just be reinforcing this monocultural view of our readers for the world. And when you open things up, first as a writer, you expand your own horizons. Maybe you expand your inspirations, like Veena was talking about, getting into that. And there are times when there are cultures that are not well known in the English-speaking world that need to be, introduced to the world. And so often by writing across cultures at certain points in time, it is a useful thing for those cultures. And I'll take the example of Pearl S. Buck, who lived in China. She was American, European descent, white person, and yet her novels were the first time in English literature that Asian figures, characters, were not unidimensional. They had deep roots to them. They were layered characters. And I think she changed the perception of Americans and other people reading English towards people in China. And so that was a good contribution, I think, by writing across cultures.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Caroline?
Yes, of course, it's very important. But at the same time, it is important for people to write about other cultures. Otherwise, like Ian said, it would be very boring if you only write about your own culture. But I think the priority should be given to writers from that culture to write about their own culture. It doesn't mean that you cannot write about it, but the priority should be given to the writer from that culture. And going back to Pearl Buck, yes, it's very important that she did all of that stuff. But in those days, in those days of Pearl Buck, there were not that many Chinese American writers. So of course, Pearl Buck will open the thing. But now there's a lot of Chinese American writers, and they should be given a chance to be published instead of having a white person writing about China.
Thank you. Alicia?
Well, I think there are definitely benefits to writing about other cultures. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, one film that I really like is the Buena Vista Social Club. I think that was the name of it, right? About the music of Cuba. Recently, I saw a film made by a white male director about Madagascar. And the film does have some flaws, but I learned so much about Madagascar and the music of Madagascar. So I interviewed the filmmaker, and I wanted to know, why do you think you're the person to make this film? And he was very honest. He said, look, it's something that's close to my heart. I know these people and I wanted to make this film. However, he acknowledged that as far as production is concerned, the people who have most access are white male filmmakers or writers. And I can just quote what he said. He said, it's true that white males from Western countries are the people that have the most access production. And he said, given the situation today, I think that local experts and artists have to be prioritized to the maximum possible. And this is the first time that somebody, responded in that way, because people tend to get very defensive when you say, why are you the person to do this or do that? So this is, again, this is just something we have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you very much, Alicia. Anyone want to add to this, comments or questions?
I have a
Renee?
question.
I think
Sorry.
that
That's okay.
I think that sometimes genre makes a difference. So writing something about the races in a nonfiction book may be a little different. I think of it as having a little more leeway in fiction. And for instance, my book is multicultural because it's about secrets of ethnicity that are kept secret and come up, as a surprise to the characters. And I grew up in Detroit, and I went to a high school that was 75% Jewish. And there is a large element of my book that deals with the Jewish culture. And I have this fear, like we're talking about others having about writing about Blacks or Chinese. I have this appropriation fear about that. And my assumption that because in my life I have been so close to a number of people who are Jewish by ethnicity, even if they are not practicing in any way, shape, or form, that I may be getting it wrong. So, but I'm pursuing it because it's crucial to my made up story.
Okay, and James?
Yeah, I wanted to say, somebody earlier, I forgot, talked about inspiration when we talk about writing about another culture, but I think we have to consider somebody that has traveled, that has researched, that is experienced in another culture, that has that passion, can be authentic in writing about it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any comments they'd like to share? This is a big topic. Surely you guys have more to say. Go ahead, Connie.
This is a great panel. I mean, if this could go on for me for a few hours, or what everybody's saying is really great. I wanted to just comment on what Caroline was saying, that there was, I mean, just to, sort of support what you're saying about having all the screeners of the readers of the novels who are white. And I know there was, the book that Oprah was touting for a while, and I think it was about a Latin American culture written by a white person, something like that. And that comment was made, and I'm hoping, it seemed obvious that the publishing world needs to be more cognizant of that and have more employees who are from different cultures. I don't know if that's changing yet, but it seems kind of obvious that even though people can write about other cultures, as lots of people have said, that's a shift that needs to be made. I don't know if anyone knows if that's on the horizon.
Liz, you have a comment? Your hand was up.
Yeah, I can't speak to the horizon, but hello everyone, and it's so nice to see familiar and new faces here. I think one of the reasons why people are slow to make comments, at least in my case, is that the topic is so complex. I really appreciate that Alicia brought up power as a component of decision making, which then is echoed in Caroline's mention of who can afford to have an underpaying job and thus be that original gatekeeper, which in my years of working in publishing in New York was absolutely true, that many of the people who were there were trust fund kids. I don't know that they all went to Harvard and Yale, but they didn't have to worry about their rent. So they came from a very particular experience. But for me, I think all of these decisions are harder and harder to parse because so many of us also have an intersectional experience where there's a component of us that could be deemed sanctioned and okay to write about something, but some other aspect of our experience. And so you could sort of see the intersections of gender and race and socioeconomic factors in our upbringing. For me, for example, one such conflict might be that I come from an African-American family, but I'm white passing. So I have all of these privileges of white people because of what I look like, but I have direct personal experience intimately with something that some people might feel I shouldn't be able to write about. So I think we're all, and that's just a teeny example, but I think we're all trying to make these decisions. And then another one that comes in there is the quality of the work. So nobody wants to be an affirmative action beneficiary if it's not based on merit. I think no artist does. No artist just wants to be published because they fit into a box. But who's determining the merit? Which goes back to what Caroline was saying about who the gatekeepers are. So it makes my head spin, really, but I'm happy to hear all of this input from various people's experience.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm not sure.
I
I'm
wanted
not
to
sure
say something.
how you.
Wait, was that Jane? Jane?
Yes, but
okay.
I can go after Dee.
Okay.
Oh, thanks. I wasn't sure how you go about indicating that you want to say something. I just wanted to say, excuse me, anything that I say first has to do only with fiction. I would feel very, very differently about writing anything in nonfiction. And I feel that we all, or most of us certainly, live multicultural lives. I mean, my world is not a world that is of white women like myself. It's a world of different genders and of certainly different ethnicities and cultures. And I feel that, you know, I have to go back again to saying that's what I mean by empathy when you're writing fiction. If you know someone well because they're in your world, even though they don't happen to have the specific, you know, ethnic background, gender, skin color, or whatever that you do, then I don't believe that it's proper. It bothers me to think of that as cultural appropriation. I'm troubled in general by the idea that fiction needs to be limited in that way. I do think it's important as a fiction writer to be able to know someone in real life, not to just be getting inside the head of someone that I've made up or that I've learned about strictly through library research. But our worlds, I mean, my world is just so multicultural. And so it seems only natural that I will be inside, when I write, that I'm inside the heads of people from many different specific cultures from my own.
Okay, thank you. And Jane, you want to go after Dee?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to get back to just the story, and if we have a story that we really want to write as an author, I have a story, and it comes down to craft as well. Crafting your characters, and we've talked about doing the research, we've talked about getting to know somebody, but if we have a burning story to tell and there's cultural aspects in it, because there are today, like Dee said, but also like Lisa said, even to a lesser extent, you know, I've just learned I'm not actually second generation Greek, I'm third generation Greek, but all my grandparents were born in Greece. And so the story I'm writing now has to do with a story that's going to make me have to write about Greeks and Greek Orthodox people. And so it's a story, we have to hold the author big, I think. And I hate to think that that today in 2020 we can't write about something because we might be afraid to get the culture wrong. And that's the worst thing of all for an artist. What I just want to also address what Caroline said. Yeah, that's a big problem. If we think the readers, original gatekeepers, are possibly keeping people of a different voice out, that's a big systemic problem. And a good publisher should probably be addressing that by making a point of finding gatekeepers that aren't just from one cultural area, however you want to define that. It could be all women, or it could be all people that went to Ivy Leagues. Maybe that's really going to change now.
This actually leads me into the third question, but before I do that, it looks like Anne Chamberlain, you want to say something?
Hi, yes, I wanted to say I had, and it's been 25 years now, an experience with the book I wrote about the history of the Turkish Empire. This was fiction. And my editor was a Latina. And I think it is because she brought that different perspective to the publishing house that she was looking for something else besides, you know, white topics, that she let me in. And then she was forced from the company. But I've always been very grateful for her. And also, those books, that was a trilogy, and they went on to become bestsellers in Turkey in Turkish translation. And it was very gratifying to me that Turkish women would come up to me and say, my grandmother said it was just like that. And but the Turkish men, I got some very hostile reactions from them, because they said, you know, the Ottoman Empire was pure, is what they said, and that none of this was going on. And so to me that, and I was told by Americans that I had got it wrong because they wanted to see a view of the Turkish harem and Turkish life that was very different than what the Turkish women remembered. So I'm gratified, first of all, to the Turkish women who validated me, but also to that Latina editor, because she brought a broader view of the world to opening the gates to me, and I'll always be grateful to her. So I can see the point about gatekeepers, and may there be more of them.
Well, and this is the reason that this leads me to the third question, is because the third question is there a role for sensitivity readers? Do we need them? In which situation would they be helpful? And for those of you who don't know what a sensitivity reader is, they're readers who review the manuscripts to help fix cultural misrepresentation, inaccuracies, stereotypes, biases, etc. So there may not be the gatekeepers, but they're verifying that the material will be appreciation versus appropriation. So let me open that up with the panelists first. And so whichever of you wishes to go first.
Okay.
Caroline, it was your question, so you get to go first.
Okay. Yes, I think they are important. I mean, they don't fix all the problem, you know, because there's only one person that cannot talk for the whole community. So a lot of artists, actually, they hire 2 or 3 of this sensitivity reader. They charge them, they don't charge a lot of money, you know, $100. Sometimes the publisher also pay them just to protect themselves against bad reviews later on. Yes, they can be helpful. For example, I'll give you one example. I'm from Vietnam, okay? So Oriental culture. same as Chinese. We have the same kind of culture. So we know from watching TV and movie that people bow to each other when they greet each other. You know, that is so common. But we don't know that touching to somebody's head is actually disrespect. You know, like an older person who touched to a kid's head, it's not a sign of affection, it's a sign of disrespect. So if you don't know this kind of stuff and you write it in your book as, oh, you know, it was a sign of affection that an older man touched it, played with the kid's head, it's not true at all, it's false. So you need, well, you don't need, but you know, it would be important you have an sensitivity reader to show you this, you know, to let you know that, you know, this is not correct, you got it wrong. Because you know, you try to look that up on internet, you can't find that anywhere. You know? Nobody's going to tell you that this is not good to do, touch people's head, but in the Orient, that's how it is. You know, that's just an example.
Okay.
But, sorry?
No. Are you done, or you want to keep going?
A lot of people say that sensitivity readers are actually they're negative. They do censorship, which is not quite true. You know, they don't tell you what to do or what to write or what to take out. They just give you opinions, and you can take it or leave it. You know, for example, if you're going to be writing a book on thriller, police thriller, you're going to ask the opinion of a policeman or a lawyer or even a doctor, and that's okay. You know, nobody ever scream about that. But if you talk about sensitivity readers, people just say, "Oh my God, this is censorship." It's not censorship. You know, it's just having somebody else from that culture giving you opinions. That's what it is, and I think it is important. Okay. And like I said, they don't fix all the problem because they're only one person. They don't represent the whole community, but they will help to make your book more authentic.
Okay, thank you. Ian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Caroline in terms of the benefits of sensitivity readers. I don't really believe in sensitivity readers that work for publishers or for grant agencies or whatever. What I do believe is in your group of first readers, and every author should have a group of first readers to get that feedback, that you have to have a broad enough group that it covers the content of your book. So if you have Jewish characters in your book, like one of the authors here, you do want to go to your Jewish author writers and ask them, how did she get it right or wrong or whatever. So that's very important. Some people call those beta readers. I call them first readers. Once you get to the publisher, really, it should be about the quality of the writing, the pertinence of the topic, and that should be really what counts for the decision to publish or not to publish. For me, I feel a little uneasy that they would hire a college student or intern just because of ethnicity to read the book and to give a very subjective view. You know, I think that should be done. The author should do that with that group of first readers.
Okay, thank you. Alicia?
I think it's something we all have to be concerned about. And the person doesn't have to have a title, sensitivity reader. I mean, that's fine, but if it's even just a friend from the culture that you're writing about, have somebody, as Ian said, and as Caroline said, have somebody read it and get a second opinion. And this can be about anything, because we're not infallible, all right? As writers, we're not perfect. And I have written, I have created characters from outside my culture, and I worry that, that I've got it wrong. And if we're talking about people from another gender, sometimes write from the point of view of a male character. And I'm sure male readers might laugh and say, what is this? I mean, men don't think like that. So you give it to your brother and you say, look, have I got it right? I mean, is this credible? So yes, I think that we all need to have people in our lives who can tell us honestly if we've got this right. And that can be a friend, that can be an editor, that can be the publisher. but it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have comments or questions about this topic about sensitivity readers? Sure, go ahead, Connie.
Just my screen says Ali, but was it Alicia?
Yes, it's
Yeah,
Alicia.
okay. I was just, in terms of male-female culture, just want to, kind of piggyback on that, because I've read 3 novels that were written from the different genders perspective, male author, who the protagonist was female and vice versa. And I could always see more of the stereotypical characteristics of the other gender show up in that person, to the point where in one book, when I first started, I thought I had the reversed who the protagonist was, because I just got kind of distracted by the number of characteristics that weren't traditionally female. So it's just kind of interesting. It does seem like even with gender, it's can be hard for us to switch gears and switch roles in that.
Right. Well, have you read the #1 Ladies Detective Agency? Because this is a male writer from Scotland who's writing about an African woman. And so, it's, yeah, is it believable? I actually like the series very much. Everyone in my family enjoyed reading the series. So sometimes I think writers can get it right. And great if that happens.
What did you say the name of the book series was?
The #1 Ladies Detective Agency, set in Botswana. Now, people in Botswana might say this is totally right. I don't know. But I think international readers, they sold very well. They have sold very well, in fact, too.
That sounds great.
I read that book. I really liked it too. It's funny, but it is something light and funny. So it passed. There's no problem. He doesn't try to make political statement. He doesn't try to be serious. So that's no problem. But if you want to write about something political, as a white male writing about a Black African woman, I don't think that would. I don't know, but in my opinion, I don't think that could pass.
So
if he's writing about something serious.
So I'm wondering here if genre becomes very important within the literary genres. I mean, so say it's a murder mystery, or it's a more mainstream kind of novel. And I mean that in a way they're supposed to work on with stereotypes and, something simpler and sort of easier to grasp and fast moving and all that. And then that's okay then. But when it comes to literature, which is a literary so-called, and it's supposed to be more serious and, as you say, get into a character, inner life that takes on issues so often. And, again, that's one question I would have about this cultural appropriation debate. And the other one would be realism versus lack thereof, because it's always like something has to be authentic, something has to be realistic. But what if it's just a story, not to entertain necessarily, but I really feel not enough distinction is made between fiction and non-fiction. Like I don't know if you are many of you are fiction writers, you get it, you're interviewed and the audience says, oh, was this and was this that? And you're like, no, it's a story, I mean, seriously. So, I mean, sometimes it needs to be taken seriously. It's like somebody said, it's extremely complex issue. So sometimes it's a real problem, the representation. But also I sometimes feel it's a little overdone. And I was just listening to Salman Rushdie actually being interviewed. And I typed in Salman Rushdie, cultural appropriation. YouTube, and I said, what's going to come up? Let's see, because I was reading something else on this topic yesterday. And he was very much prioritizing the story. And then people can say, oh, that's a way of evading the issues. It's so elite. And oh, Rushdie, what the hell? He's like this best-selling guy. But he is a person of color also. He's a man, yes. So it all becomes, I don't know, it's very complex, I think. And I feel it's very individual. Each book, each novel has a different, I mean, you cannot sort of generalize. in some ways maybe you can, but you also like maybe there's sometimes too much generalization. So anyway, I don't think I've made that much sense maybe, but just brought up a few things.
You know, on the issue of writing with characters that are completely different, you know, sometimes it does work. I think if it's not literary fiction, if there's not some real message that you want to get across, you don't have to have the personal experience. And there's one author by the name of Ian Hamilton. He writes crime novels. And Ian is an interesting guy. In his 60s, he had some type of stroke or whatever, and he decided to change his life. And he had been in business all his life with the Orient, with China mostly. And so he started to write as part of his therapy. And he wrote a novel, crime novel, with a lesbian Chinese Canadian auditor that gets together with her uncle, who's a triad member, and they solve crimes that start off with financial crimes and turn into, you know, become other crimes. So, you know, who would publish that? So he sent it to the House of Anansi, as you know, Vina, is a very much people of color type of publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And his editor was Janie there, who's Chinese Canadian, and she loved it. And now he's on to his 13th book with the same type of theme. And people, especially the Chinese Canadian community, and you know, they buy up these books because it tells them a lot of what's going on in contemporary China and Hong Kong, and these type of themes that they feel close to. But as a person, this is not his, you know, his origins are not there, though he's lived in those countries or he's worked in those countries. So sometimes it does work.
Yeah.
However, if Ian Hamilton was to write about racism directed towards Chinese Canadians and how that felt, you know, from childhood on, I think that would be cultural appropriation. That would be inappropriate for him to write that. So Jean, I think, has an important role in determining where the boundaries should be as a writer. It's, you know, you have to have good judgment. You have to have a good moral compass guiding you when you decide to write about things.
Mm-hmm.
Jane, it looked like you had something to add before.
Yeah, I was just touched when it was right before you mentioned Salman Rushdie. And so I've been living outside of the United States a long time, okay? In 2 years, I'm gonna be in France as long as I was in the United States. And so I've kind of missed all this movement, the whole political correctness thing. I missed it all. And I've been in a culture that is behind on all that, you know. And so sometimes I just wonder, I hear Salman Rushdie, and then what happened to him when they put the Ayatollah, put the death thing on him, you know. And so I was just thinking, what's the responsibility of writers? I mean, we're talking about an awful lot, like the responsibility of Facebook. I mean, it's horrendous when, in my opinion, when a Facebook who's functioning kind of like a news outlet isn't getting regulated, and there's nothing, you know, to guarantee that a lot of the lies and the things that get on there and people read and actually can impact an election. Okay, but we're talking about writers, and so where is the line now? What is our responsibility as writers? And so it just, sometimes it rings a little bit to these Franco-American ears of mine to be, and I'm going to be really sarcastic and like, okay, so are we worried about lawsuits? You know, is that what happens in America now? Is you're going to get a lawsuit if the publisher doesn't say, I had a sensitivity reader. And so, you know, a writer, it should be, if it's being, you do your job, you have your responsibility, you're writing, trying to write the truth, and you're trying, I mean, I'm a beginner writer, so I'm not like you all, but I'm just saying it's dangerous. When do you slide so down the slope where you're going to end up with a country that's like what happened to Salman Rushdie, and he had to go into hiding when it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago. I remember that. So anyway, I'm just throwing that perspective in there, you know, with all due respect. But, you know, we're writers. We're not, we're not selling, we're not newspapers, we're not governments, we're artists, or are we? I don't know. I guess it's how you define what a writer is now.
Okay. Okay, Lise has had her hand up for a while. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Two things now, because everyone's saying such interesting things. One is that I really appreciate the reframing of the idea of a sensitivity reader, which made me feel very squidgy. It really did not appeal to me because it sort of implicitly seemed to be so subjective that it felt like you were being asked to give over your authority over your work to somebody else's authority over the work in a way that was undefined. But all of the examples that the panelists have given speak to a kind of cultural fact-checking that I think is fantastically important, and our responsibility as writers to be concerned with that. So whenever I hear the word sensitivity reader, I'm going to think cultural fact checker. And the other aspects of that, which are the subjective aesthetic opinion or personal emotional opinion, is secondary to me to the cultural fact checking in terms of what I would give the most credence to. Not to say that I wouldn't listen if someone said I'm really offended by this, but I would want to know why and get to the why of that and work with that. The other thing I have to say, it's Alexander McCall Smith who writes the Ladies #1 detective series, by the way. But something Ian said, actually, I'm going to push back a little bit on that, about the idea that genre sort of absolves you from having to contend with certain matters such as racism. And I think that a lot of people who have direct experiences of some kind of prejudice or racism in their lives would say that it transcends genre in its omnipresence. And so, for example, if you look at Walter Mosley's fantastically written mystery series, which are quite literary, I would also say, but Walter Mosley's setting is Los Angeles post-World War II, but his protagonist is a Black man. In many of he actually has very different sort of threads of books, but race is big in there, and that's a mystery series. So I think, I don't know if you're not, I don't know how you cannot engage with racism if you write a book based in America, whoever you are, and possibly two other places, but the United States is the place I know.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that we have 3 minutes left. So if anyone would like to kind of just wrap it up and make some final comments, maybe from the panelists, I'd appreciate that. Ian?
You know, I was just thinking the last comment. It's interesting for Ian Hamilton's books. You never come across a white character, hardly any, in his books, because they're about China and Hong Kong, and he's completely immersed into it. On the issue of race, actually the dominant race is the Chinese race because it's in China. So I think that this is interesting. I wonder if this also is the same with the #1 ladies detective agency, if everything's in Botswana and it's not in a multicultural setting. I don't know the books myself. Perhaps it becomes a relevant issue that if you decide and you have the knowledge of a particular country and you want to write in that society where all the characters are part of the dominant group in the society, but they're non-white, perhaps that works. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there.
Carolyn, do you have anything to add to this before we sign off?
No,
Alicia? Where's Alicia?
Oh, I think she's gone.
Oh, Alicia had to leave. Okay, so we're actually out of time. And I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you, panelists. Thank all the participants for being on this. This was a Weiss-sponsored Paris Writers Workshop free discussion. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of weekend and also a fantastic Bastille Day.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adrian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, panelists.
Bye.
Thank you.